Life was supposed to be steady by now. After 12 years of marriage, I thought Vanessa and I had found our rhythm. We weren't the flashy couple who traveled the world or threw extravagant parties, but we had something solid, or so I believed. Our life revolved around our two kids, Liam and Chloe, and the small routines that came with raising a family. Weeknight dinners, weekend soccer games, and quiet nights on the couch watching old movies had defined our lives for years. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I always thought Vanessa and I were a team. She'd been my rock during the ups and downs of my career, and I tried to be hers as she advanced in her field. Recently, she'd been promoted, which came with a heavier workload and new colleagues. She often mentioned one in particular, Derek. At first, I didn't think much of it. Vanessa talked about Derek as if he were just another coworker. Derek said this in the meeting, or Derek had a great idea for the project. But as the weeks went by, his name became a fixture in nearly every conversation. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was nothing. Vanessa had always been loyal, and I had no reason to think otherwise. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that Derek was becoming more than just a name in her stories. The way she spoke about him, with a hint of admiration, a sparkle in her eye, made my chest tighten. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, she was my wife. She loved me, didn't she? But the changes in her were hard to ignore. Vanessa started spending more time at work, coming home late with vague excuses about project deadlines and team dinners. When she was home, she was distant, her attention fixed on her phone or her laptop. I'd ask about her day, but her answers were clipped, almost rehearsed. Conversations became arguments, and arguments turned into silence. I felt like I was living with a stranger. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Chloe asked if Mommy would be home early the next day to watch her school play. Vanessa hesitated, glancing at her phone before responding. "I'll try, sweetie, but I can't promise. I have a late meeting with Derek." Liam groaned, rolling his eyes. "You're always working, Mom. Can't Derek handle it for once?" Vanessa shot him a sharp look. "Liam, that's enough." I stayed quiet, but the comment lingered in my mind. Even the kids were noticing her absence. That night, as we lay in bed, I decided to bring it up. "You've been spending a lot of time at work lately," I said carefully, not wanting to start another fight. Vanessa sighed, not looking up from her phone. "It's just a busy time, Daniel. You know how it is." "Yeah, I do," I replied, my voice firmer now. "But it feels like you're prioritizing work over us, over the kids." She finally looked at me, her expression tired and irritated. "What do you want me to do, Daniel? Quit my job? Derek and I are leading a major project. I can't just walk away." I swallowed the lump in my throat, deciding not to push further. But the tension between us was palpable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our family was beginning to fracture. As the days turned into weeks, the cracks in our marriage widened. Vanessa became more irritable, snapping at me over the smallest things. I'd ask about her day, and she'd roll her eyes, muttering, "Do we have to do this every night?" She seemed to avoid being home as much as possible, and when she was, it felt like her mind was elsewhere. I found myself retreating emotionally, unsure of how to reach her. The love and laughter that had once defined our relationship were replaced by arguments and silence. I began to dread coming home, knowing that our conversations would either end in a fight or a cold, dismissive shrug. I tried to focus on the kids, making sure they felt supported and loved despite the growing tension between their parents. Liam and Chloe deserved stability, even if Vanessa and I were struggling to provide it. But every time I saw the confusion in their eyes or heard them ask why Mommy wasn't home, my heart broke a little more. One evening, as Vanessa worked late in her home office, I stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. She didn't notice me, too engrossed in whatever was on her laptop. I wanted to tell her how I felt, to ask her why she seemed so distant, but the words caught in my throat. I didn't know if I could handle her brushing me off again. Instead, I turned and walked away, retreating to the couch where I spent most nights alone. As I stared at the blank TV screen, I couldn't help but wonder if our marriage had reached a point of no return. The family I had worked so hard to build was slipping through my fingers, and I felt powerless to stop it. The distance between Vanessa and me grew wider with each passing day. It wasn't just her late nights or the constant talk about Derek anymore. It was her entire demeanor. She seemed more dismissive, almost annoyed by my presence. The warmth and familiarity that had once defined our relationship felt like a distant memory. One evening, as I cleared the dinner table, Vanessa leaned against the counter scrolling through her phone. I couldn't help but notice her laughing softly at something on the screen. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Oh, just something Derek sent," she replied without looking up. "He's hilarious." Her words hung in the air, sharp and cutting in a way she didn't seem to notice. I forced a smile and turned back to the dishes, but inside, something cracked. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the realization that someone else was occupying the space in her life where I used to be. As the weeks went on, Derek's name became a fixture in our home. Every conversation seemed to circle back to him. "Derek thinks this," or "Derek said that." It was as if he had become a constant presence, even when he wasn't there. I tried to tell myself it was just a work thing, that their connection was purely professional, but my gut told me otherwise. The first real blow came at a work event Vanessa insisted I attend with her. I wasn't thrilled about the idea. I'd never been one for corporate parties, but I thought it might be a chance to spend time with her, to reconnect in some small way. Instead, it felt like I was crashing someone else's date. From the moment we arrived, Derek was everywhere. He greeted Vanessa with a familiarity that made my stomach churn, his hand lingering on her back just a little too long. They laughed and talked as if they were the only two people in the room, leaving me to awkwardly sip my drink and make small talk with strangers. At one point, I caught Derek whispering something in Vanessa's ear. She laughed, leaning into him, her hand lightly brushing his arm. My chest tightened as I watched the scene unfold, the two of them so engrossed in each other that they didn't even notice me standing a few feet away. I waited until we were alone to bring it up. "What's going on with you and Derek?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. Vanessa rolled her eyes, clearly irritated. "Nothing, Daniel. He's just a coworker. A coworker who whispers in your ear and makes you laugh like that?" I shot back. "It doesn't look like nothing." She crossed her arms, her expression hardening. "You're being ridiculous. This is why I didn't want you to come tonight. You always overreact." Her words stung, but what hurt more was the way she dismissed my feelings so easily. I wanted to fight back, to make her see how her actions were affecting me, but I knew it would only escalate into another argument. So, I let it go for the moment. That night, as we drove home, the tension between us was palpable. Vanessa was glued to her phone, texting someone with a faint smile on her lips. I didn't have to ask who it was. "Vanessa," I said, breaking the silence, "I need you to hear me out." She sighed, setting her phone down but not looking at me. "What now, Daniel?" "I don't like the way Derek interacts with you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It's disrespectful to me, to our marriage." She finally turned to face me, her expression a mix of annoyance and disbelief. "You're jealous," she said flatly. "That's what this is about. You're insecure, and you're projecting it onto me." Her words cut deeper than she realized. I wasn't insecure. I was hurt. Hurt by the growing distance between us, by the way she seemed to prioritize Derek over our family, by the way she made me feel like I didn't matter anymore. "I'm not jealous," I said quietly. "I'm trying to protect what we have." She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "Maybe you should focus on fixing yourself instead of trying to control me." The conversation ended there, with both of us retreating into silence. I stared out the window, my mind racing with thoughts I didn't know how to articulate. How had we gotten here? How had the woman I once considered my partner become someone I barely recognized? Over the next few days, I tried to keep my distance, hoping the space would ease the tension. But it didn't. Vanessa continued to bring up Derek in casual conversation, her tone light and carefree, as if nothing had changed. I couldn't tell if she was oblivious to the damage she was causing, or if she just didn't care. One evening, as we sat in the living room, I noticed her phone light up with a text. She glanced at the screen, smiled, and quickly replied before setting it face down on the table. My heart sank. I didn't need to see the name to know who it was. "Vanessa," I said, my voice breaking the silence. Do you even want to fix this? She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. Fix what? Us, I said simply. Our marriage. She hesitated for a moment before shrugging. I don't know, Daniel. Maybe I'm just tired of feeling like I have to babysit your insecurities. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I stared at her, searching for some sign of the woman I had loved for over a decade, but she wasn't there. Vanessa was slipping away, and I didn't know how to stop her. That night, as I lay awake in bed, I realized something painful but undeniable. I couldn't save our marriage on my own. If Vanessa wasn't willing to fight for us, then maybe it was already over. Vanessa's distant behavior wasn't just affecting me anymore. It was starting to affect the kids. Liam and Chloe were sharp, perceptive, and they could sense the growing tension in the house. They asked fewer questions about their mom's late nights and stayed out of her way when she was home, but I could see the confusion and hurt in their eyes. It broke my heart. They deserved better than this version of our family. And then there was Derek. He wasn't just a name in conversations or a shadowy figure in Vanessa's stories anymore. He was a physical presence in our lives. He started showing up at the house, ostensibly to help Vanessa with work. At first, I tolerated it, reasoning that maybe he was just a coworker trying to assist her with her busy schedule. But it didn't take long for his visits to cross the line. Derek was loud, arrogant, and far too comfortable in my home. He would saunter in, cracking jokes as if he were the head of the household, and Vanessa would laugh at his every word. It was like I was invisible. Even worse, he started engaging with Liam and Chloe in a way that felt performative, like he was trying to ingratiate himself into their lives. Chloe, ever the polite one, would smile and nod, but Liam wasn't as easily charmed. He would glare at Derek, his lips pressed into a thin line, and retreat to his room whenever Derek showed up. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table helping Chloe with her homework, Derek arrived unannounced. He walked in with a box of takeout, grinning as if he owned the place. Thought I'd bring dinner for everyone, he announced, setting the box down on the counter. I looked up, my jaw tightening. We've already eaten, I said flatly. Vanessa breezed into the room, brushing past me to grab plates from the cabinet. Well, I haven't, she said, her tone dismissive. Thanks, Derek. You didn't have to do that. Anything for you, Derek replied, winking at her. My grip on the pencil in my hand tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. Chloe glanced between the three of us, her small face clouded with confusion. I'll finish this in my room, Dad, she whispered before slipping away. Later that evening, Derek lingered in the living room long after I thought he should have left. Liam came downstairs for a glass of water and froze in the doorway, watching as Derek leaned back on the couch, his arm draped casually over the backrest near Vanessa. The sight of it made my blood boil. Derek, I said, standing up and walking into the room. It's getting late. Don't you have somewhere else to be? Derek smirked, not bothering to move. Relax, Daniel. We're just going over some work stuff. I think you've done enough work for one night, I said, my voice firm. It's time to go. Vanessa rolled her eyes, setting her laptop aside. Daniel, stop being so dramatic. He's just helping me with the presentation for tomorrow. Then he can help you from his own home, I snapped. This isn't a co-working space. Derek finally stood, but not before leaning in close and saying something to Vanessa that I couldn't hear. She laughed softly, brushing her hair behind her ear. My fists clenched at my sides, but I held my ground as he made his way to the door. Just as he reached the threshold, Derek turned back, a smug grin on his face. Good night, Vanessa. Always a pleasure. Oh, and Daniel, lighten up, will you? And then, he did something I couldn't believe. He stepped back into the room, slapped me hard across the face and said, You're not the man of the house anymore. That's my job. The room went silent. Liam, who had been watching from the staircase, gasped audibly. Chloe peeked out from the hallway, her eyes wide with fear. Vanessa stood frozen, her expression unreadable. My face burned, not just from the slap, but from the humiliation. This man had disrespected me in my own home, in front of my family, and Vanessa said nothing. I stared at Derek, my vision blurring with rage. Every insult, every condescending remark, Every smirk flashed through my mind. He had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to stand for it. "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. He smirked again. "Or what? You'll call the cops?" "Go ahead, tough guy." That was it. I didn't think, I just acted. Grabbing him by the collar, I slammed him against the wall. Years of pent-up anger and humiliation came rushing out as I held him there, my face inches from his. "You don't get to come into my house and disrespect me," I growled. "Not ever." Vanessa gasped, rushing forward. "Daniel, stop." But I didn't stop. Not yet. Derek had brought this on himself, and I wasn't about to let him walk away without understanding the consequences of his actions. Time seemed to slow as I held Derek against the wall, his arrogant smirk finally replaced with a flash of panic. My fingers gripped his collar tightly, and I could feel his chest rising and falling under the pressure of my hold. Every ounce of frustration, humiliation, and anger that had built up over the past few months surged through me in that moment. "You've disrespected me for the last time," I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "In my house? In front of my kids? Not anymore." Derek's hands came up defensively, but I tightened my grip, refusing to back down. "Relax, man," he choked out, his tone no longer dripping with confidence. "It was just a joke." "A joke?" I barked, slamming him harder against the wall. "You think slapping me in front of my family is a joke? You think walking into my home like you own the place is funny? Let me show you how I deal with jokes." Vanessa stood a few feet away, frozen in place. "Daniel, stop," she screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "You're overreacting." Her words only fueled my anger. Overreacting? I had stood by for months as she let this man invade our lives, humiliate me, and disrespect our marriage. And now she was defending him? I turned my head slightly to look at her, my grip on Derek never loosening. "You think this is overreacting?" I said, my voice trembling with fury. "You've been letting this man walk all over me, over us, and I'm the one overreacting?" Liam and Chloe stood at the base of the staircase, their eyes wide with fear. My heart broke seeing them like that, but I knew I had to finish this. Derek needed to learn that actions had consequences, and I needed to show my kids that I wouldn't let anyone, not even their mother's so-called coworker, disrespect me. Derek squirmed, trying to break free, but I shoved him back again, my face inches from his. "You want to play alpha in my house? Let's see how well you handle it." He finally managed to mutter, Okay, I get it. Let me go." I released him abruptly, and he stumbled forward, coughing and clutching his collar. Before he could regain his composure, I pointed to the door. "Get out," I spat. "And if you ever come near my family again, I won't be this polite." Derek glared at me, his bravado returning slightly as he adjusted his shirt. "You're crazy, man," he muttered. "No wonder Vanessa's been." I took a step toward him, and he immediately shut his mouth. Without another word, he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him. The sound echoed through the house, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. I turned to Vanessa, who was staring at me with a mix of anger and disbelief. "What the hell was that?" she demanded. "You can't just attack people like that, Daniel." My chest heaved as I tried to calm my breathing. "Attack people?" I said, my voice still trembling with rage. "He slapped me, Vanessa. In front of you. In front of our kids. And you just stood there." "He was joking," she shot back, her arms crossed defensively. "You took it way too far." "Too far?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "Vanessa, he has been disrespecting me, disrespecting our marriage, for months. And you let him. You encouraged it." Her face softened for a moment, but then she quickly hardened her expression. "You've been paranoid since the beginning. This is on you, not me." I stared at her, my heart sinking. This wasn't just about Derek anymore. This was about us. About a marriage that had been eroding for months, piece by piece. "If you can't see what's wrong with what just happened," I said quietly, "then I don't think there's anything left to save." Vanessa opened her mouth to respond, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said firmly. "I've had enough. I can't do this anymore." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked upstairs to check on Liam and Chloe. They were in Chloe's room, huddled together on her bed. Liam looked up as I entered, his eyes filled with questions he didn't know how to ask. "Are you okay?" I asked gently, sitting down beside them. Liam nodded slowly. "Is Derek gone?" "Yes," I said firmly. "He's not coming back." Chloe leaned against me, her small frame trembling. "Daddy, are you and Mommy okay?" she whispered. I swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "Things are complicated right now," I said honestly. "But I promise you, no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. Both of you." They nodded, and I stayed with them until they fell asleep, their breathing steady and calm. As I watched them, a sense of clarity washed over me. I couldn't let them grow up in a home filled with tension and disrespect. They deserved better. And so did I. When I finally went back downstairs, Vanessa was waiting for me. "We need to talk," she said, her tone softer now. "No, we don't," I replied, my voice resolute. "We're past talking, Vanessa. You made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Her eyes widened, but I didn't stay to hear her response. I walked past her, grabbed my keys, and left the house. It was time to take back control of my life. I spent the night driving aimlessly, the silence of the car the only thing keeping me grounded. My mind was a storm, replaying every moment of the evening. Derek's smirk, his audacity, and the look on Vanessa's face when she defended him over me. The betrayal was raw, an open wound that refused to stop bleeding. I pulled into a motel parking lot as the first rays of dawn painted the sky. Exhausted but too restless to sleep, I checked in and collapsed onto the stiff mattress. For hours, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts a jumble of anger, sadness, and a creeping realization. I couldn't keep living like this. Vanessa had made her choice, and now it was time for me to make mine. The next morning, I called a lawyer. The decision felt heavy, like admitting defeat, but I knew it was the right one. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, detailing the months of tension, Derek's intrusion into our lives, and Vanessa's refusal to see the damage she was causing. My lawyer listened patiently, offering reassurance that I was taking the right steps to protect myself and my children. "First things first," she said. "We need to secure your finances. If Vanessa has been influenced by this man, there's no telling what she might do next." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me over the phone. "I'll handle it." I spent the rest of the day taking back control of my life. I froze our joint accounts, ensuring Vanessa couldn't access my hard-earned savings. I changed the locks on the house, leaving a note on the door explaining that she could contact me through my lawyer if she needed anything. It felt cold, but after everything that had happened, I couldn't afford to be soft. When I returned to the house later that evening, it felt strange walking into what used to be our shared home. The silence was deafening, the emptiness a stark contrast to the chaos that had filled it just 24 hours ago. Liam and Chloe were staying with my sister for the night, a temporary arrangement until I could figure out the next steps. I missed them already, their laughter, their presence, the way they brought life into every corner of the house. As I sat in the quiet living room, Vanessa's absence felt like both a loss and a relief. Part of me mourned the woman she used to be, the partner I thought I could rely on. But another part of me was grateful for the space to breathe, to think clearly without the constant tension hanging over my head. The peace didn't last long. Around 9 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Vanessa. "We need to talk. You can't just lock me out of the house like this." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Her audacity knew no bounds. After everything she had done, she still believed she had the upper hand. I typed out a short response and hit send. "Talk to my lawyer." Seconds later, the phone rang. Her name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't deal with her manipulation anymore. This wasn't about her feelings or her attempts to justify her actions. It was about protecting myself and my kids. The next morning, I met with my lawyer to officially file for divorce. The words felt foreign as they left my mouth, like I was speaking about someone else's life. But the reality of the situation was undeniable. Vanessa had crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, and there was no coming back from that. "She'll likely contest custody," my lawyer warned. "Are you prepared for that?" I nodded. She's free to try, but I'll do whatever it takes to keep my kids safe. She's the one who brought chaos into their lives, not me. Over the next few weeks, I focused on creating stability for Liam and Chloe. I moved their belongings into my sister's spare room, ensuring they had everything they needed to feel at home. I kept my explanations simple, avoiding details that would confuse or upset them. Mom and Dad are taking some time apart, I said gently. But I'm here, and I always will be. They adjusted surprisingly well, their resilience a testament to their strength. Liam started opening up more, asking questions about the future and expressing his relief that Derek was no longer in the picture. Chloe, ever the optimist, focused on the small joys, movie nights with her cousins, bedtime stories from me, and the promise of weekend trips to the park. Vanessa, meanwhile, continued her campaign of deflection and blame. She sent message after message, accusing me of being controlling, paranoid, and unreasonable. Each one went unanswered. I had no interest in engaging with her. My lawyer assured me that my silence was the best course of action, and I trusted her judgment. Then, one evening, Vanessa showed up at the house unannounced. I heard the banging on the door before I saw her through the peephole, her face flushed with anger. "Daniel, open the door," she shouted. "You can't just cut me out like this." I didn't respond. I stood silently behind the door, watching as she pounded on it again. Eventually, she stopped, stepping back with a frustrated sigh. "You think you've won," she muttered, her voice quieter now. "But you'll see. This isn't over." As she walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't over, but I was ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control of my life, and I wasn't going to let Vanessa or anyone else take that away from me. The morning after Vanessa's dramatic attempt to show up at the house, I knew I had to move quickly. I couldn't afford to let her unpredictable behavior interfere with the stability I was working so hard to create for Liam and Chloe. I reached out to my lawyer again to solidify my plans. If Vanessa wanted to contest custody, I was ready to fight for what was best for my kids. Sitting in my lawyer's office, I laid out everything: the toxic influence Derek had on our home, Vanessa's unwillingness to set boundaries, and how their relationship had created a hostile environment for the children. My lawyer listened intently, her pen moving steadily across her notepad. "Daniel," she said, looking up at me, "you have a strong case for full custody, but we need to be strategic. Document everything, every interaction, every message. The more evidence we have, the better." I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and determination. "I'll do whatever it takes," I said firmly. "I just want my kids to have a stable, healthy environment." That same day, I took steps to ensure my financial security was airtight. The accounts were already frozen, but I went a step further, closing joint credit cards, rerouting direct deposits, and ensuring Vanessa had no access to my funds. It wasn't about revenge. It was about protecting myself and my children from any reckless decisions she might make. Vanessa had shown time and again that her priorities were no longer aligned with mine or our families. When I returned home that evening, the house felt strangely quiet. Liam and Chloe were still staying with my sister, and the absence of their laughter and energy left a void that made the space feel hollow. I decided to distract myself by sorting through the clutter that had accumulated over the years: old photo albums, forgotten toys, and stacks of papers that told the story of a life that now felt so distant. As I sifted through the memories, I came across a photo of Vanessa and me from our early days of marriage. We were smiling, carefree, and full of hope for the future. I stared at the picture for a long time, searching for some clue as to where things had gone wrong. But the answers weren't in the past. They were in the choices we'd made along the way, the cracks we'd ignored until they became too wide to bridge. My phone buzzed, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was a message from Vanessa, the latest in a string of attempts to get my attention. "You're being unfair, Daniel. You can't just shut me out like this. We need to talk about what's best for the kids." I resisted the urge to respond, instead forwarding the message to my lawyer as part of the documentation process. Vanessa's idea of what's best for the kids had been clouded by her own selfish decisions for far too long. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation any further. The next day, I met with a family therapist to discuss how to navigate the transition for Liam and Chloe. The therapist was kind and understanding, offering practical advice on how to support the kids through the changes. They need consistency and reassurance, she said. Make sure they know they're loved and that this isn't their fault. Her words stayed with me as I picked up Liam and Chloe from my sister's house that evening. They ran to me, their faces lighting up as they hugged me tightly. "Dad, can we have pizza for dinner?" Liam asked, his voice hopeful. "Of course," I said, ruffling his hair. "Anything for you too." Over dinner, we talked about their day and made plans for the weekend. It felt good to see them smile, to know that despite everything, they were finding moments of happiness. I was determined to give them the stability they deserved, no matter how hard the road ahead might be. Vanessa, meanwhile, continued her attempts to undermine me. She sent messages through mutual friends, painting me as controlling and unreasonable. One evening, a mutual friend called me, trying to mediate. "Daniel, don't you think you're being a little harsh?" they asked. "Vanessa's struggling too. Maybe you should try to work things out for the kids' sake." I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but this isn't about being harsh. It's about protecting my kids from a situation that's not healthy. Vanessa made her choices, and now I'm making mine." The friend didn't have much to say after that, and I hung up feeling both drained and resolute. It was exhausting to keep defending my actions, but I knew I was doing the right thing. In the weeks that followed, I focused on creating a sense of normalcy for Liam and Chloe. We established new routines, homework at the kitchen table, movie nights on Fridays, and trips to the park on weekends. Slowly but surely, the house began to feel like a home again. Vanessa's messages grew less frequent, though the few I did receive were laced with bitterness. It was clear she wasn't used to losing control, and she didn't know how to handle it. But I didn't let her anger deter me. My priority was my kids, and I wasn't going to let anything distract me from that. One evening, as I tucked Liam and Chloe into bed, Chloe looked up at me with her big, innocent eyes. "Dad," she said softly, "are we going to be okay?" I smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "We're going to be more than okay," I said. "I promise." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The weeks that followed were some of the most transformative of my life. With the legal battles underway and Vanessa largely out of the picture, I turned my focus inward. For the first time in years, I prioritized myself, not just as a father, but as a man who deserved more than the chaos Vanessa had brought into my life. My days started early. I'd wake up before the kids, take a quiet moment to sip my coffee, and plan out the day. Then I'd get them ready for school, packing lunches and making sure Liam had his soccer gear and Chloe had her favorite book for reading time. Dropping them off at school became a ritual, a reminder of why I was fighting so hard to create a stable life. They were my reason for everything. Once the kids were at school, I threw myself into work. The projects I'd been juggling were finally taking shape, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control. I expanded my network, reaching out to former colleagues and exploring opportunities one hadn't considered before. Slowly but surely, I rebuilt the professional confidence Vanessa's constant belittling had eroded. But it wasn't just work that changed. I started taking better care of myself physically, too. I joined a local gym and began working out regularly, a decision inspired by both my frustration and a desire to channel my energy into something productive. The physical changes came quickly, but it was the mental clarity that made the biggest difference. With every workout, I felt stronger, not just in my body, but in my resolve. The kids noticed the changes, too. "Dad, you look happier," Chloe said one night as we sat on the couch watching a movie. Her words caught me off guard, and I had to blink back tears. "Thanks, sweetie," I said, pulling her close. "That means a lot." Liam, who had been quieter since everything happened, started opening up more. One night, as I was tucking him in, he asked, "Do you think Mom will come back?" I paused, sitting on the edge of his bed. "Liam, your mom will always be a part of your life, but things are different now," I said gently. "What matters is that you and Chloe are safe and happy, and I'll do everything I can to make sure of that." He nodded, seeming to understand in a way that surprised me. "I like it better here now," he said quietly. It feels peaceful." His words stayed with me long after he fell asleep. They were a reminder that the choices I was making, however difficult, were the right ones. My kids needed peace, and I was determined to give it to them. As the weeks turned into months, Vanessa's presence in our lives diminished. Her messages became less frequent, and the few times she reached out, it was clear she was struggling. She had underestimated just how much of her life had been tied to mine. Financially, emotionally, and even socially. Without the support system I had built, she was adrift, and it showed. Meanwhile, I began to feel like myself again. Or perhaps a new, stronger version of myself. I reconnected with old friends, people I hadn't seen in years because I'd been too caught up in the whirlwind of my marriage. One of those friends introduced me to Sophia. Sophia was unlike anyone I'd ever met. She was kind and warm, but also fiercely independent and confident. We met for coffee one afternoon, and what was supposed to be a quick chat turned into hours of conversation. She listened without judgment as I talked about the struggles of the past year, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly heard. "Sounds like you've been through a lot," she said, her eyes thoughtful. "But the fact that you're here, moving forward, says a lot about your strength." Her words hit me harder than I expected. "It hasn't been easy," I admitted, "but I'm trying." "Well," she said with a small smile, "trying is more than most people do." Over the next few weeks, Sophia and I grew closer. She wasn't just a breath of fresh air. She was a reminder that love didn't have to be complicated or painful. She met Liam and Chloe, and they adored her instantly. Chloe would climb into her lap during movie nights, and Liam would excitedly show her his latest soccer moves. Seeing her with my kids felt natural, like she was meant to be a part of our lives. Vanessa, of course, didn't take kindly to hearing about Sophia. One evening, she sent me a long, angry message accusing me of moving on too quickly and replacing her in the kids' lives. I didn't respond. Her bitterness was her burden to carry, not mine. Sophia, for her part, handled the situation with grace. "She's hurting," she said when I told her about the message. "That doesn't excuse what she's done, but it explains why she's lashing out. Just keep focusing on the kids and your future. That's what matters." She was right. My focus was no longer on the past or the mistakes Vanessa had made. My focus was on the life I was building, a life filled with love, stability, and hope. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was moving forward, leaving the pain and chaos behind. The legal proceedings against Derek began unfolding just as my life started to stabilize. It started with a simple but telling revelation. Derek had been stealing from his company for years, embezzling funds to support his lifestyle of flashy cars, expensive suits, and the lavish dinners he had used to charm people like Vanessa. A part of me wasn't surprised. Men like Derek often hid behind arrogance to cover up their insecurities and lack of integrity. It wasn't hard to connect the dots once the investigation began. The authorities uncovered a trail of financial misconduct that stretched back years. It turned out he had also harassed several colleagues, manipulating them into silence with threats and promises. His confidence wasn't just arrogance. It was the false bravado of a man who had spent years skating on thin ice. What shocked me most, however, was how deeply Vanessa had been tied to it all. While she wasn't directly involved in the embezzlement, her name appeared in enough documents to raise eyebrows. Lavish dinners billed to the company, gifts that had been written off as expenses, and frequent charges from luxury spas and boutiques, all linked to Derek's corporate credit card and benefiting Vanessa. My lawyer kept me informed throughout the process, and I provided everything I could to assist. I wanted to make sure the truth came out, not just for justice, but to protect Liam and Chloe from being dragged into any more chaos. If Vanessa thought Derek was her ticket to happiness, she was about to learn just how wrong she'd been. The day Derek was arrested was surreal. I wasn't there to witness it, but I heard about it through mutual contacts. He was at his office, still smug and untouchable, when the police arrived. They escorted him out in handcuffs, and the image of his arrest quickly circulated online. Seeing his name and photo attached to headlines like "Corporate Scandal," "Executive Arrested for Fraud," brought an odd sense of closure. The man who had tried to humiliate me, who had invaded my home and disrespected my family, was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Vanessa's response to the news was almost predictable. At first, she tried to play the victim, insisting she had no idea what Derek had been doing. "I thought he was just successful," she said in a voicemail she left me. "I didn't know he was a fraud." I didn't bother responding. Her claims of innocence might have held more weight if she hadn't so willingly participated in the perks of Derek's schemes. She had chosen to align herself with him, and now she was facing the fallout. It didn't take long for the consequences to catch up with her. She lost her job. Her employer didn't want to risk their reputation by being associated with someone tied to such a scandal. Friends who had once admired her lifestyle distanced themselves, and she found herself isolated, scrambling to pick up the pieces of a life she had helped destroy. One evening, as I was finishing dinner with Liam and Chloe, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "I need to talk to you. Please, Daniel. Just give me 5 minutes." I stared at the message for a long moment before deleting it. I had nothing left to say to her. She had made her choices, and now she was dealing with the consequences. My priority was my children, and I wasn't going to let her drama disrupt the peace we had worked so hard to create. Chloe noticed the change in my expression and tilted her head curiously. "Everything okay, Dad?" I smiled, reaching over to ruffle her hair. "Everything's just fine, sweetheart." The truth was, everything really was fine. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of control and clarity. The chaos that had defined my life with Vanessa was gone, replaced by a calm, steady rhythm. Liam and Chloe were thriving in the stable environment we'd built, and I was more focused than ever on providing them with the love and support they deserved. Sophia was a big part of that stability. She was patient and understanding, never pushing but always present. She helped with the kids, offered advice when I needed it, and reminded me that I didn't have to face everything alone. Her presence was a constant source of comfort and strength. As Derek's trial approached, I found myself reflecting on how far I had come. The man I had been when Vanessa and Derek tried to tear me down was almost unrecognizable. Back then, I had felt weak, defeated, and uncertain of my place in the world. Now, I was stronger, more confident, and deeply rooted in the life I was rebuilding. When Derek was finally sentenced, several years in prison for fraud and embezzlement, it felt like the last chapter of a painful story had been written. Vanessa's attempts to reach out grew less frequent, and eventually, they stopped altogether. She had become a ghost, a distant memory of a life I had left behind. One night, as I sat on the porch with Sophia, watching the stars with a glass of wine in hand, she turned to me and smiled. "You did it, Daniel," she said softly. "You fought for your kids, for yourself, and you won." I looked at her, my heart full of gratitude and love. "I didn't do it alone," I said. "You've been my anchor through all of this." She leaned against me, her warmth a reminder of everything good that had come from the ashes of my past. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. "The best is yet to come." For the first time, I truly believed her. Months after Derek's arrest and Vanessa's descent into obscurity, life began to feel normal again, or perhaps better than normal. The chaos and betrayal that had once defined my days were now distant memories, replaced by a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Liam and Chloe had adjusted beautifully, and our home was filled with laughter and light. One Saturday morning, I sat at the breakfast table with them, sipping coffee while Chloe worked on an art project and Liam doodled in his notebook. It was a quiet, unremarkable moment, but it was exactly what I had been fighting for. A stable, happy environment where my kids could thrive. "Dad," Liam said suddenly, looking up from his notebook, "do you think we'll ever see Mom again?" The question caught me off guard. Vanessa's absence had been a source of relief for me, but I knew the kids still missed her, even after everything. I set my coffee down and met his gaze. "I don't know, buddy," I said honestly, "but what I do know is that you and Chloe are my top priority. I'll always make sure you're safe and happy." Chloe piped up, her voice cheerful. "We're happy now, Dad. Right, Liam?" Liam nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, we are." Their words warmed my heart and strengthened my resolve. I had done the right thing by cutting Vanessa out of our lives, even if it hadn't been easy. Sophia continued to be a source of support and love, not just for me but for Liam and Chloe as well. She had become an integral part of our family, and the kids adored her. Chloe would often curl up next to her during movie nights, while Liam loved to show her his soccer moves in the backyard. Watching them bond with her was a joy I hadn't anticipated, and it solidified my belief that we were building something special. One evening, as Sophia and I sat on the couch after the kids had gone to bed, she turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "How are you feeling about everything now?" she asked. "With Vanessa, Derek, the divorce, all of it?" I took a deep breath, considering her question. "Honestly, I feel free," I said. "For so long, I was carrying this weight, trying to fix something that was broken beyond repair, trying to hold on to a version of Vanessa that didn't exist anymore. Letting go was hard, but it was the best thing I could have done for myself and the kids." Sophia smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "You've come so far." Her words meant more than she knew. It wasn't just about surviving the betrayal. It was about rebuilding my life and creating a better future for myself and my kids. And with Sophia by my side, I felt like anything was possible. One day, while running errands in town, I unexpectedly ran into Vanessa. She was standing outside a small cafe, her face pale and tired, her once confident demeanor replaced by something fragile and uncertain. She spotted me before I could slip away, and her eyes widened. "Daniel," she said, stepping toward me. "Hi." "Vanessa," I replied, my tone neutral. "How are you?" She hesitated, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I'm managing," she said. "I heard about Derek." "Everyone has," I said flatly, making no effort to hide my lack of sympathy. She winced but pressed on. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. I know I messed up, and I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed you to hear that." Her apology was unexpected, but it didn't stir the emotions it might have months ago. I felt nothing but a distant, detached pity for her. "I appreciate you saying that," I said simply, "but I've moved on." She nodded, her eyes downcast. "I can see that. You look happy." "I am," I said, and for the first time, I truly meant it. As I walked away, I felt no lingering anger or sadness, only a sense of closure. Vanessa's regret was her burden to carry, and I had no interest in revisiting the past. My life was no longer defined by her choices. It was defined by the future I was building. Back at home, I told Sophia about the encounter. She listened quietly, her hand resting on mine. When I finished, she smiled. "You handled that with grace," she said. "I'm proud of you." Her words stayed with me as I reflected on how far I had come. The man I was now, stronger, wiser, and more confident, was a far cry from the man Vanessa had tried to tear down. I had reclaimed my life, and in doing so, I had created something beautiful. That night, as I tucked Liam and Chloe into bed, Chloe looked up at me with her big, bright eyes. "Dad," she said, "do you think everything's going to stay happy like this?" I smiled, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "I think we're just getting started," I said. "The best is yet to come." And as I walked out of their room, I knew it was true. With Sophia by my side and the kids thriving, I was finally living the life I had always dreamed of, a life filled with love, laughter, and endless possibilities. The day I had been working toward finally arrived, a day that symbolized not just a new chapter in my life, but the culmination of all the struggles, growth, and victories that had brought me here. It was a bright, crisp morning, and I found myself standing in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie on my suit. Today wasn't just another day. Today, Sophia and I were getting married. Liam stood beside me, straightening his little bow tie, his reflection mirroring my proud smile. "You nervous, Dad?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. "Not at all," I replied, kneeling down to adjust his tie. "I'm ready. I've never been more sure of anything." His grin widened, and he gave me a quick hug. "I'm happy for you, Dad. And for Sophia. She's the best." Hearing that from Liam meant the world to me. Both he and Chloe had embraced Sophia with open arms, and seeing their bond grow over the past months had been one of the greatest joys of my life. Sophia wasn't just someone I loved. She was someone who had brought light and warmth into our family in a way I hadn't thought possible. The ceremony was held in a picturesque garden, surrounded by friends, family, and the people who had supported us through the hardest times. As I stood at the altar, watching Sophia walk down the aisle, my heart swelled with gratitude. She looked breathtaking, her smile radiant as she approached. Chloe walked beside her, tossing flower petals with giddy excitement, while Liam stood proudly as my best man. When Sophia reached me, she took my hands in hers, her eyes shining with emotion. In that moment, everything else faded away. The pain of the past, the struggles we had endured, it all felt like a distant memory. All that mattered was the future we were building together. The vows were simple but heartfelt, each word carrying the weight of our journey. I promise to stand by you, through every challenge and every triumph, I told her. You've shown me what true partnership looks like, and I'm so grateful to walk this path with you. Sophia's voice trembled slightly as she responded, her eyes never leaving mine. You've shown me what strength, resilience, and love truly mean, she said. With you, I've found my home. When the ceremony ended, and we were pronounced husband and wife, the applause and cheers from our loved ones filled the air. I kissed Sophia, holding her close as Liam and Chloe ran to join us, their laughter ringing out like music. It was a moment I would treasure forever, a moment that symbolized everything I had fought for. The reception was a joyous celebration, filled with laughter, dancing, and heartfelt toasts. My sister Samantha stood up to speak, her voice filled with emotion as she recounted the journey I had been on. Daniel, you've shown all of us what it means to rise above, she said. You've built something truly beautiful, and I couldn't be prouder of the man you've become. Liam and Chloe gave their own short speeches, their words sweet and genuine. We love you, Dad, Liam said, glancing at Sophia with a shy smile. And we love Sophia too. Thanks for making us a family. Tears pricked my eyes as I hugged them both, my heart full of gratitude for the life we were creating. As the evening wore on, I took a quiet moment to step outside and look up at the stars. The garden was illuminated by soft string lights, and the distant sound of music and laughter drifted through the air. Sophia found me there, slipping her hand into mine. Everything okay? She asked, her voice soft. More than okay, I replied, pulling her close. I was just thinking about how far we've come. It feels surreal. She smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. You deserve this, Daniel. Every bit of it. You've worked so hard to build this life, and now it's yours. I kissed her forehead, feeling a profound sense of peace. Ours, I corrected. We built this together. As the night came to an end, and we said our goodbyes to friends and family, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't realized I still needed. The journey to this moment hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the struggles, they had all led me here, to a life filled with love, trust, and endless possibilities. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a new rhythm. Sophia and I worked together to create a home that was full of warmth and laughter. Liam and Chloe thrived, their bond with Sophia growing stronger every day. We planned family trips, shared meals, and celebrated the little moments that made life so special. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, Sophia turned to me with a smile. What are you thinking about? She asked. Everything, I said, my voice filled with contentment. How far we've come. How lucky I am. She leaned against me, her hand resting on mine. The best is yet to come, she said softly, and I believed her. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. My life, once defined by chaos and betrayal, had become a testament to resilience, love, and the power of starting over. With Sophia by my side and my kids thriving, I knew the future was bright. This was the life I had fought for, and it was more than I ever could have imagined. I was in the middle of boarding a flight to Zurich, surrounded by the quiet bustle of first-class travelers and polished airport announcements, when my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with her name. Just the sight of it used to make me smile reflexively, like muscle memory tied to better days. But that morning, something was off. My stomach twisted before I even answered. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was the way her name didn't sit right on my screen anymore. Hey, you might want to sit down, she said. There was no warmth in her voice. No nervous giggle. No apology. Just flat delivery. Almost as if she was reading off a script she'd practiced in front of a mirror. I was halfway through the boarding tunnel when I froze. I stepped aside, letting others pass, the weight of her tone sinking in before the words even landed. I sold the farmhouse, she said. I didn't respond. Couldn't. My mouth was open, but the words got stuck somewhere between disbelief and rising nausea. For 1 million, she added, like she was giving me a discount on a pair of shoes. 1 million, I finally managed to say. It's worth 9. Yeah, but Ray needed the capital for his fitness app, and you never really did anything with the place anyway. Ray. The name hit me like a low blow to the ribs. I leaned against the wall of the jetway, my boarding pass crumpling in my hand. You mean your trainer? I asked, my voice low and deadly calm. She hesitated. Just for a second. That was all I needed. He's more than that, she finally said. He believes in me. In us. He needed a partner. I hung up, not because I didn't have more to say, but because if I had said it, I might have screamed, might have cursed, might have lost the last shred of composure I had left in a public airport. Instead, I turned around. I walked straight to the airline desk and canceled my flight to Zurich. I was supposed to speak at the Global Agricultural Summit. I was going to unveil a hybrid irrigation model I'd spent 5 years developing. But in that moment, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was getting home. The drive from the airport back to the estate took 4 hours. Every mile I drove, I replayed her words in my head like a bad song I couldn't shut off. He needed it more than you. That line kept echoing, not just because of its cruelty, but because of its arrogance. As if she truly believed she could take what generations had built and hand it over to some clown in gym shorts because she felt inspired. I wasn't even surprised about Ray. I'd seen the signs. Too many sessions that ran late. Too many weekend retreats that had nothing to do with wellness. I had chosen to look the other way, trusting the illusion because it was easier than facing the truth. I let the lie sit in our home like a ghost, silent but present. That was my mistake. But this was something else. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft. Betrayal wrapped in casual conversation, sealed with a smug sense of entitlement. She thought she was playing chess, and that I was too naive to see the board. But what she didn't know, what she had never bothered to understand, was that the farmhouse she sold wasn't even the real one. By the time I reached the estate gates, the sky had turned a soft gray. Rain threatened in the distance, but hadn't fallen yet. I paused at the entrance and looked up at the wrought iron sign. Tolliver Acres. My grandfather's name. His legacy. Our legacy. The house that greeted me was familiar only in structure. It looked wrong somehow. Different. Like someone had tried to stage it for a magazine cover and failed miserably. Cheap paint-covered old brick. New furniture sat awkwardly in a house that once breathed history and purpose. They'd changed the drapes. Swapped out the light fixtures. Even the smell was different, artificial, hollow. But I didn't rage. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask who had moved in. Because I already knew. The moment she told me what she'd done, I knew she had sold the guest house. The replica. The one I had renovated a decade ago as a distraction project when I was recovering from back surgery. The one tourists came to for weekend retreats. It was a mock-up, a facade. The real farmhouse, the one passed down by my grandfather, had been relocated years ago. She sold a shell. I stood there on the gravel path and let that irony sink in. She thought she had stripped me of everything. She thought she had gutted me to fund her boyfriend's startup dreams. But all she'd done was pawn off an empty set piece, thinking it was the crown jewel. And that's when I laughed. Not a bitter, broken laugh. A real one. Quiet. Clean. I laughed because she had no idea what she'd actually done. She had no idea how much worse she had made it for herself. Because now I wasn't just angry, I was focused. I turned my back on the faux farmhouse and made my way to the real one. It sat hidden beyond the orchard, tucked behind an old ironwood grove and wrapped in the same white brick my grandfather laid himself in the 1940s. I'd moved it there out of sentiment and strategy. I'd preserved it down to the nail. That was the heart of the estate, and it was untouched. I lit the fireplace and sat in the old wooden chair by the window. I thought about the 10 years I gave to her. The trust. The compromises. The way I used to bring her here when we were first dating, showing her the fields, the soil, the sunsets. I thought she understood what it meant to be part of something older than money. Something rooted in time. But I was wrong. The woman I married would have protected this place with her life. The woman she became sold it for a boyfriend's business idea built on protein powders and shallow dreams. I poured myself a drink and watched the fire glow against the stone. I wasn't going to retaliate with anger. That's what she expected. She thought I'd come back swinging. But revenge, real revenge, is never loud. It's meticulous, precise, legal. Tomorrow, I'd call Miles. Tonight, I'd let the storm inside me settle, because the real one hadn't even started yet. I stepped onto the land just as dusk began to bleed into the edges of the sky. The soft orange glow kissed the tops of the trees, casting long shadows over the gravel path. It should have hurt, seeing the land in this condition, seeing what she had done to it. But all I felt was a cold, steady calm rising through me like smoke through a chimney. I wasn't heartbroken. That emotion had already been burned through. This was something else. This was focus. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I walked the perimeter. The place had been tampered with, decorated like some weekend getaway from a brochure for city couples looking to reconnect with nature. Someone had power washed the charm right off the brick walls. There were solar lights shoved into the flower beds, which had been dug out and replaced with mulch and some landscaping stones you could find at any hardware store. But what really stung, what made my jaw tighten, was the absence. Gone were the wind chimes that used to hang under the eaves. Gone was the broken rocking chair my grandfather used to sit in during summer evenings, refusing to throw it out because a man should have one thing he never replaces. Gone were the family photos I'd framed and hung in the hallway when we first moved in. It was like someone had tried to erase the soul of the house. I opened the door and walked in without knocking. The new locks were an insult. She'd changed them as if I was some intruder. But I had the master key, the one no one else knew about. I installed it years ago during a renovation, back when I still believed I needed to protect the place from outsiders, not my own wife. Inside, it looked worse. She or someone else had painted over the rich mahogany trim in an off-white that looked like drying glue. The old fireplace had been sealed. The scent of lemon-scented cleaner clung to the air like desperation. On the wall where my grandfather's portrait used to hang, there was now some abstract print in black and gold, trying too hard to look expensive. I knew she thought it was an upgrade, a modern touch. But it was just noise. Empty noise. I walked through the rooms like a ghost. I stopped in the kitchen, where we used to have coffee on Sunday mornings, where she once burned pancakes so badly we had to eat them with spoons. I stood in the hallway, where I used to find her humming to herself as she reorganized the bookshelf for the 5th time. I remembered the smell of fresh apples in September, the muddy boots we used to leave by the back door after harvest walks. None of that was here anymore. And yet, the pain didn't come. Because here's the part she didn't know. What no one knew, really. This house, this shell, it wasn't the real farmhouse. Not anymore. The real one, the one with history in its walls and blood in its bricks, was tucked away on the far side of the estate, across the willow-lined creek. I had moved it years ago, slowly, brick by brick, board by board, to protect it. I restored the replica for tourist retreats and business guests, letting this fake version soak up the attention while the real home slept in peace behind a veil of trees and tradition. This house, what she sold, was a decoy. She had no idea. I knelt down near the fireplace and pulled up a floorboard I had hollowed out years ago. Inside was a sealed envelope containing the original deed, clearly marked, signed, and notarized, with coordinates and descriptions pointing to the real farmhouse. There was also a letter from my grandfather, one I'd kept sealed until now. I broke it open and read it under the fading light. If you're reading this, it means the house has become a target. We build things in this family not for comfort, but for legacy. If someone tries to take that from you, let them think they've succeeded. The land remembers. And so do we. I closed the letter, set it back in the hollow, and sealed the board again. A deep breath escaped my chest, something between a sigh and a slow release of everything I'd held in since that call at the airport. Outside, the wind started to pick up, rustling the fields that had been left unattended. Weeds were creeping in along the edges. Tools were rusting on the side of the barn. The irrigation pipes I'd spent months designing sat in disrepair. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I was planning. The next step would be legal. This wasn't about emotion now. It was about consequence. It was about reminding her, and Ray, that some legacies don't vanish because someone signs the wrong document. This was about restoration. Not just of property, but of pride. Of clarity. I walked the perimeter of the land one last time before heading back toward the old growth. As I passed the orchard, I stopped to pick a rotting apple off the ground and crushed it in my hand. The juice ran down my fingers, sticky and sour. She thought she could sell off my inheritance for pennies. She thought she could convert 10 years of partnership into a down payment on some man's dream. But all she did was start a fire in a place she didn't understand. I paused at the edge of the grove and looked back. The farmhouse she'd sold stood silent and dumb in the fading light. It looked proud in a hollow way, like someone wearing a medal they didn't earn. She thought she had one. But the truth? She had sold herself out of everything and didn't even know it yet. Tomorrow, I would go see Miles, the old lawyer who'd been by my grandfather's side until the end. He'd know what to do with the trust, with the clause, with the contract she never bothered to read. She had signed it blindly, trusting that I would never use it. But the moment she moved that money, without my signature, she triggered something irreversible. It wasn't just betrayal. It was proof. And proof was the only thing that mattered now. I walked back to the real farmhouse under the cover of nightfall. The house was lit with a single lamp in the window, glowing like a lighthouse. That's the difference between her and me. She lived for the illusion. I preserved the truth. And now the truth was about to come for her quietly, legally, and with the full weight of a legacy she never took the time to understand. The next morning, I was already on the road before the sun had fully risen. The gravel crunched beneath the tires as I left the estate, the fog still clinging low over the fields like a protective shroud. I didn't sleep much the night before, just enough to keep my mind sharp. Sleep wasn't important. Precision was. What Lila had done wasn't just reckless. It was illegal. She had no idea what she'd walked into when she thought she was making a bold, independent move. I drove to Ashcroft and Granger, the law firm that had handled my grandfather's affairs for nearly 4 decades. Miles Granger was the kind of man who wore linen in the winter and smelled like cedarwood and paper. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharper than his years should allow, and he never wasted words. When I walked into his office that morning, he looked up from his desk and smirked, just a slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. "She did it, didn't she?" he asked, pushing a leather-bound folder across the desk. I nodded and sat down. "She sold the show," I replied. He chuckled, not with joy, but with grim satisfaction. "I told your grandfather that someone would try one day," Miles said. "He didn't trust easy, but he trusted you. That's why he wrote the Iron Clause." The Iron Clause. Grandfather's final safeguard, woven into the estate trust like a hidden blade in a gentleman's coat. It was clear, airtight, and legally binding. No property could be sold, transferred, mortgaged, or liquidated without the written consent of the heir, me. Any unauthorized transaction would trigger immediate legal reversal, asset recall, and full financial restitution payable by the offending party. No loopholes. No exceptions. "She signed everything," I said. "She thought I'd never enforce it." Miles opened the folder and slid a document toward me. "Then it's time." I looked over the form. It was simple, a trigger notice. Once filed with the county registrar and the family trust board, it would nullify the transaction within 72 hours. But that wasn't even the harsh part. The clause demanded restitution. She would owe the trust every cent from the fraudulent sale, plus damages. "This will hit her like a freight train," I said quietly, not with malice, but with certainty. Miles tapped his pen on the desk. "Good. She needs to understand legacy is not something you gamble." He leaned back in his chair. "Ray's involved, right?" I nodded once. "Then we'll need to move fast. Once people like him smell a crash coming, they start vanishing into the wind." I signed the trigger notice and passed it back to him. My hand didn't shake. We spent the next hour reviewing the trust in detail. I'd read it before more than once, but this time, every word felt different. He highlighted parts one hadn't considered in years. Provisions for estate damage. Clauses for personal asset freezes. Protections for generational holdings. My grandfather had written it with the kind of foresight you only get from surviving 2 wars and a lifetime of betrayal. He trusted love but documented his land like he was preparing for battle. Before I left the office, Miles handed me a sealed envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Your grandfather's final amendment. He told me to give it to you if this clause was ever used." I took the envelope and slid it into my coat pocket. My fingers ran across the seal, but I didn't open it. Not yet. When I got back to the estate, the air had shifted. It was crisper, cleaner. Maybe it was just my perspective. I walked straight to the study in the real farmhouse and locked the door. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up the sale records. Lila hadn't just made a foolish move. She had documented it in painful detail. Her signature, her power of attorney claim forged with a digital stamp I never approved. The wire transfer to Ray's startup account. All right there. She thought the world was built on charm and momentum. She never understood that it's really built on paper and precedent. I drafted a legal letter, attached the trigger documents, and sent it to her email. Not a text, not a phone call. A formal communication with violation of estate clause, immediate restitution required, as the subject line. By the time I finished, it was nearly noon. I poured myself a black coffee and took it out to the porch. The field stretched out before me like an old painting, imperfect, weathered, and alive. I sat down and finally opened the envelope Miles had given me. Inside was a single sheet of heavy parchment paper written in my grandfather's unmistakable scrawl. If you're reading this, then the house didn't protect itself. But that's all right, because you did. You're my grandson, not just by blood, but by backbone. Don't let their noise make you doubt your silence. The land belongs to those who endure it, not just inherit it. Forgive where you must, but never forget to try to erase your name from your own soil. I folded the letter and stared out across the trees. Forgiveness, that part still felt distant. I wasn't sure yet what it would look like. But forgetting? No, that wouldn't happen. Not because I was bitter, but because memory was part of survival. Later that evening, just as the sun started to dip again, I received a reply. Lila. The subject line was empty. The body of the email was short. What the hell is this? You're bluffing. You wouldn't ruin me like this. She still didn't understand. This wasn't about ruin. This was about restoration. She had walked into a battlefield blind, smiling, thinking she was the hero in her own little drama. But this land had its own memory. This legacy had its own rules. And she'd broken them all with a smirk. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the old wooden drawer in the study and pulled out a second file. One that listed every asset still in her name, at least for now. She was still living in the lake house. Still driving the BMW I leased under the estate fund. Still using the joint credit line. But not for long. Tomorrow, I'd trigger the next clause. Tonight, I'd sleep under a roof she never touched. In a house she never corrupted. On land that remembered every footstep and every betrayal. Because this wasn't just revenge. It was inheritance. And it was time she understood the difference. The meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Miles had insisted we hold it in his private legal office, not the main boardroom. Less show, more consequence, he'd said. And I agreed. This wasn't about putting on a display. It was about delivering truth with precision. I arrived 15 minutes early. The leather-bound folder sat in my hands like a loaded weapon. Inside was everything. The deed reversal, the trust activation, the wire fraud documentation, the clause enforcement order, and the restitution breakdown. Every page was prepared, signed, and ready for submission. All I needed was to watch her face when she realized what she'd done. At 10:03, the door creaked open, and she walked in like she owned the room. Lila wore her arrogance like perfumed, strong, artificial, and impossible to ignore. Her heels clicked against the tile as she entered with the poise of someone who thought this was still a negotiation. Behind her was Ray, in a bomber jacket and sunglasses, indoors, no less, chewing gum like he was at a casting call. He didn't offer a handshake. I didn't offer a glance. Miles gestured for them to sit across from me. The table was wide, cold oak, just like my grandfather's dining table. Fitting. I'm going to speak plainly, Miles began. The doku. What we're doing here is a courtesy. Lila blinked, smiling like she was humoring a child. I'm not sure I understand what the urgency is here. The sale was clean. The buyer was legitimate. Miles didn't flinch. You sold property held in a protected trust, without the required written consent of the beneficiary. That triggers what we call the iron clause. He slid the folder across the table to her. She opened it with one manicured hand and started scanning. The shift was immediate. The smile dropped. Her eyes moved faster. Pages turned with increasing panic. Ray leaned over her shoulder. Wait, what is this? He said, frowning now. Restitution clause? Miles interjected calmly. That's the part where the trust sues for damages. The full market value of the illegal sale must be repaid by the offending party, or all associated assets become subject to freeze and liquidation. That includes joint property, vehicles, accounts, anything co-owned or funded through the estate. Lila's voice cracked for the first time. But I didn't know. I didn't mean. You didn't read, I said, finally speaking. That's not a defense. That's negligence. She turned to me then, fully. You're really going to do this to me? No, I replied, steady as stone. You did this to yourself. Ray laughed, clearly trying to deflect. Man, come on. It's just a house. And we've got bigger plans now anyway. The app is going public. Miles chuckled softly, almost pityingly. You might want to hold off on that press release, Mr. Raymond. The investment funds your company received were tied directly to stolen assets. That makes the transfer fraudulent. A recall has already been filed with the bank, and an injunction is pending with the local court. What the hell does that mean? Ray snapped. It means, I said, turning toward him, you're going to have to explain to your investors why their seed money was funded with stolen property proceeds. Good luck raising capital from behind a desk with no wheels. He stood suddenly. This is harassment. I'll sue. You're welcome to try. Miles replied calmly, reaching into his drawer and pulling out another envelope. But I would advise you read this first. Ray took it with a scowl. As he flipped through the paperwork, I could see the color drain from his face. Injunctions, fraud implications, wire transfer violations, his name was on every one of them. His signature, timestamped and traceable. The look in his eyes shifted from arrogance to dread in seconds. Lila, meanwhile, was now whispering to herself as she reread the documents. This can't be real. I didn't know. You can't just freeze everything. I live in that house. I need that car. That's my life. It was, I corrected her. Until you decided to sell mine. You could have warned me, she said bitterly. You could have told me before it got this far. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. You told me. On the phone, that Ray needed the money more than I did. You made your choice. I'm simply honoring it. She slumped back in her chair, the fire now flickering out. Miles waited a beat, then tapped a final document on the table. This is your notification of breach and formal notice of restitution enforcement. If you wish to contest it, you may do so in court, but I assure you, the odds are unfavorable. She didn't move. She just stared at the papers in front of her, like they might rearrange themselves into something more forgiving. But they wouldn't. Ray turned toward her, his tone suddenly cold. You told me this place was yours. I thought it was, she whispered, eyes wide. I stood. That was enough. I had seen what I needed to see. Before I walked out, I looked at her one last time. I didn't do this to punish you. I did this to protect what matters. Something you never cared to understand. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Outside, the air was crisp and bright. I walked to my truck without looking back. Behind me, I heard Ray raise his voice, demanding answers, demanding money. I didn't care. Let them fight it out among themselves now. They built their house of cards. It wasn't my job to hold it up. What mattered was the land. The real land. The one she didn't touch. The one she never valued because she was too busy chasing something shinier. I drove back to the farmhouse in silence, the folder beside me on the passenger seat. The trigger had been pulled. The clause was active. There was no going back now. But I wasn't grieving. I was reclaiming. Back at the estate, I walked the field alone. The wind was stronger now, pushing against me like resistance. But it didn't bother me. I had something stronger. Paperwork. Legacy. Truth. That night, I was sitting in the kitchen of the real farmhouse, a cup of black coffee cooling in my hand, when her name lit up on my phone. I stared at the screen for a moment, watching it buzz on the wooden table. The message preview flashed once. Can we talk? 3 words. Short. Almost innocent. But after everything, they felt like a punchline. I didn't respond right away. Part of me wanted to block her. Another part wanted to ignore her into oblivion. But the bigger part, the one that had survived her betrayal, was curious. Not for her sake, but mine. What could she possibly say now? What story would she spin after watching her illusion crack in front of a lawyer and a man she once vowed to love? So I texted back, come to the farmhouse. The real one. She replied with a single question mark. I didn't elaborate. Let her figure it out. An hour later, her car pulled up the gravel path. She must have driven fast, too fast, because I could hear the tires skid slightly as she parked. When she stepped out, I saw her hesitate. She looked around, confused. This part of the land had been off limits for years. I kept it that way on purpose. She had no idea what was here. To her, it was just an overgrown patch of trees and brush. She never once asked why I insisted on maintaining it alone. Now she would see. She approached slowly, her heels crunching over the gravel, her coat pulled tight against the night chill. When she finally reached the porch, she looked up at me with wide eyes. This "This is the farmhouse?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "The real one." I watched as her eyes moved over the white brick walls, the antique lanterns glowing softly in the dark, the wooden beams hand-carved by my grandfather. Her mouth parted slightly, as if words were forming but couldn't quite push through. "You moved it," she said, stepping slowly onto the porch. "You rebuilt it out here?" "Brick by brick," I answered. "While you were spending weekends in Malibu and wellness retreats in the city, I was out here, preserving what mattered." She looked stunned, not just because of what she saw, but because of what it meant. That the house she sold, the one she thought was the crown jewel, was nothing more than a prop. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked through the doorway like she was stepping into a church, quiet, hesitant, reverent. Her eyes scanned the room, taking in the old armchair, the fireplace, the framed photos still sitting untouched on the mantel. Her fingers grazed the edge of the oak table as she passed, like she was testing if any of it was real. "I thought I knew this land," she said, more to herself than to me. "I thought we were building something here." "No," I said plainly. "You were waiting for it to grow in value so you could cash out." She turned to face me. "That's not fair." "What part isn't?" I asked. "The part where you sold it behind my back? The part where you funded your boyfriend's dream with my legacy? Or the part where you thought you were clever enough to get away with it?" Her face flushed. For a moment, I thought she'd fire back with one of her signature comebacks, the kind she used when we argued about furniture or friends or finances. But this wasn't that version of her. This was something else. Something stripped bare. "I didn't plan it like that," she said finally. "It didn't start that way. I didn't even mean to fall for Ray. I just..." "Just what?" She looked away. I felt invisible. "You were always working. Always obsessed with the land, the trust, the crops. Everything had to be done your grandfather's way. You talked more to your irrigation team than you talked to me. Ray, he made me feel seen. I let that hang in the air. I wasn't going to defend myself. I wasn't going to argue that I worked hard so we could live well, that I kept the legacy intact because someone had to. I wasn't even going to remind her that I'd invited her to be a part of it 100 times before she chose distance over participation." She walked toward the mantel and picked up a photo. Me and grandfather, arms around each other, covered in soil from digging the new water line back in 2011. "He left this to you because he knew you'd protect it," she said quietly. "And I tried to sell it like it was nothing." "You didn't just try," I said. "You did." She put the photo back down and took a deep breath. "Ray's gone. He left the same night you triggered the clause. Said he didn't sign up for drama. His app isn't going anywhere. I haven't heard from him since." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She turned to me again. Her voice was softer now. "I didn't love him. I thought I did. I think I just loved the idea of escape, of feeling like someone needed me." "You were needed," I said. "But you wanted worship." Silence settled between us. Heavy. Honest. "I've been staying in a motel," she said finally. "My accounts are frozen. My lawyer says I should try to negotiate a settlement." "There's nothing left to negotiate," I said. "You violated the trust." "The house you live in? Not yours. The car? Leased through the estate. Even your name is on the list for court restitution. You don't need a lawyer. You need accountability." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't move. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I nodded. "That's a start." She sat down at the table, her shoulders slumped. The powerful, calculating woman who once stood over me in arguments now looked like someone who had lost her map. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I just wanted you to know. I get it now. What this place means. What I ruined." I poured her a glass of water and slid it across the table. It wasn't just a house. It was history. She nodded slowly, gripping the glass like it was the only solid thing left in her life. "I should go," she said after a while. I opened the door for her. She paused in the doorway and turned back. "Thank you for not humiliating me," she said. "I didn't need to," I replied. "You did that yourself." She walked out into the night, her silhouette fading into the shadows like a ghost retreating to wherever it came from. I stood there for a while, staring at the spot where she'd sat. The house felt heavier somehow, like it had absorbed everything she said. But it also felt stronger, like the truth had finally settled into the floorboards. I turned off the lights and walked upstairs. She had finally seen the real farmhouse. But more importantly, she had finally seen what she gave up. The next morning was colder than usual. The kind of morning where the frost clings to every surface like a warning. I stood on the back porch of the real farmhouse, a thermos of coffee in one hand and the other tucked in my coat pocket. The field stretched out in every direction, silent and waiting, like they were holding their breath. I watched a few birds flutter from one branch to the next in the old oak trees, the only movement in an otherwise still world. It was peaceful. But I knew that peace had a price, and I was about to collect. I had spent the last few days reviewing everything, every account Lila touched, every credit card she used, every subtle withdrawal masked as miscellaneous expenses. She had been draining money behind my back for years. Not in dramatic sums, but in quiet, calculated ways. Small transfers to private accounts. New accounts I hadn't even known existed. Gifts she bought for friends, but never explained. Donations to fitness charities with Ray's name listed on the advisory board. Even a small wire labeled business development that had ended up in a shell company. And all of it was mine, my money, my effort, my family's legacy. But that wasn't what hurt the most. What hurt was how easy it had been for her to do it, and how easy it had been for me to miss it. I sat at my desk in the study, the windows open just enough to let the chill keep me awake. In front of me was a binder I'd labeled withdrawals, unapproved. Each page told a story of betrayal. Some were petty, some were surgical. All of them were dishonest. By the time the sun had fully risen, I knew what I had to do. There was a second clause, a part of the estate trust buried in legal language and overlooked by almost everyone except Miles, and now me. It was called the fraud clause. It stated that if a legal spouse committed financial misconduct, defined as theft, unauthorized asset liquidation, or fraudulent transactions, they forfeited all access to jointly owned assets until a full investigation by the Family Trust Board concluded. But the real blow? The clause also authorized the trust to immediately lock or reassign all estate-related holdings to the original heir. Everything. The house Lila was still technically squatting in. The car registered under her name. Even the passive investments she'd been benefiting from for years, dividends from land leases, profits from the Vineyard Partnership, trust fund interest accounts. They could all be seized, reassigned, or frozen with a single court submission. And today, I would pull that lever. I met Miles at his office by 10 a.m. sharp. He was already waiting, tie loosened slightly, glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed the file I'd sent him the night before. She skimmed more than I expected, he said, flipping through the binder. But you documented it well. This is more than enough. I want to trigger the fraud clause, I said. All of it. He looked up at me. Are you sure? Yes. He nodded. Then let's get to work. We spent the next few hours preparing the formal filings, statements, affidavits, transfer requests. I signed where needed. He notarized where required. By noon, it was done. All we need to do is deliver this packet to the county clerk and the trust board office, he said. After that, she's locked out. And so, by 2 p.m., the trigger was pulled. It didn't take long for the consequences to unfold. At 3:47 p.m., I got a call from the local sheriff's office. They'd been dispatched to her address to deliver the notice of eviction and asset freeze. No drama, they said. She answered the door, confused, tried to argue, but when they handed her the envelope, she went silent. Signed for it. Then stepped back inside and shut the door. At 4:22, she tried to access the joint account. Denied. At 4:29, her card was declined at a boutique she frequented downtown. The owner, who also happened to be the cousin of one of my ranch managers, texted me personally. Your wife tried to use a frozen card. Looked shaken. Didn't make a scene, though. At 5:02, my phone rang again. It was her. I stared at the screen. Let it ring twice. Then picked up. You froze everything, she said, voice sharp and breathless. I triggered the clause. I replied evenly. You activated it the moment you started taking what wasn't yours. You can't do this, she hissed. I have nowhere to go. You had a house, I said. You sold it. You had savings. You drained them. You had a marriage. You threw it away. Her voice cracked. I didn't know it would come to this. You didn't care where it would go, as long as it got you what you wanted. She was quiet for a beat. Then, Ray's gone. Everyone's gone. I'm not surprised, I said. People like him only stick around when there's something to take. You're not even angry, she said, almost in disbelief. You sound like you're reading from a script. I'm past anger, I replied. Anger was last week. This is something different. This is clarity. Silence. Then, softly, what happens now? Now, I said, leaning back in my chair. Now you live with the choices you made. and I rebuild what you tried to destroy." She hung up. No screaming. No begging. Just the soft, resigned sound of someone who realized the door had finally shut. That night, I went through the house and made notes for restoration. Floors to be polished. Paint to be stripped. Furniture to be replaced. I called Jacob, the same carpenter who helped me rebuild the replica farmhouse, and asked if he was free next month. He said yes, and when I told him why, he said simply, "About time." I spent the rest of the evening walking the land, breathing the cold air, watching my breath hang in front of me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt grounded. There was no parade in my chest. No thrill of revenge. Just a steady beat of purpose. She took what she could because she thought I'd never fight back. Because I'd spent so long loving quietly, supporting patiently, listening when no one else would. She mistook my calm for weakness. But calm isn't weakness. It's preparation. It's restraint. And now that the rope had been pulled, the curtain lifted, the game exposed, there was only one thing left to do. Begin again. The next morning, the frost had melted into mist, and the weight of what I had done settled into the walls of the house like silence after a storm. Triggering the fraud clause hadn't been a whim. It was a line in the sand. One that couldn't be crossed again. I knew Lila would try something. She always did. When cornered, she'd squirm, then charm, then throw herself into chaos hoping someone else would clean it up. But this time, I was done being the cleaner. I had barely finished my coffee when my phone buzzed. It was Miles. "She's already called 3 different attorneys," he said without preamble. 2 declined. 1 agreed, until he read the trust documents. I smirked. "They read the clause?" "Twice," he said, his tone dry. "The language is clear. The moment you sign that trigger, everything in her name tied to the estate was locked. She's calling it theft." I reminded her it was preservation. "She won't stop," I said. "No," he agreed. "But she'll lose." That afternoon, I visited the Trust Board's regional office. A modest 2-story building tucked between a law firm and a florist, but what went on inside carried the weight of legacy. Generational wealth doesn't rely on passion. It runs on documents, signatures, and unbreakable clauses, something Lila had never understood. I met with Miranda DeWitt, chair of the local estate division. An older woman with silver-streaked hair and a voice that didn't need to rise above a whisper to command attention. She greeted me with a firm nod, gesturing to a chair across her desk. "We've reviewed the documents. Every transfer, every expense, every login trail. You did your homework." "I had to," I said. She was siphoning my life while sleeping beside me. "She's not the first," Miranda said, not unkindly. "Entitlement dressed as love rarely ends quietly." She slid a folder across the table. "Here's the formal confirmation. As of 10 a.m., Lila Tolliver is locked out of all estate-linked accounts, properties, and legal privileges. She cannot access, contest, or claim anything unless she wishes to fight the trust in court, and even then, the burden of proof falls entirely on her." I nodded. "Let her try. Just be ready," Miranda said, locking eyes with me. "This is the part where they scramble. Desperate people get noisy." Noisy was right. By evening, my inbox was filled with them. "How could you do this to her? She made a mistake. This isn't justice, it's cruelty. You're being cold." "Vindictive." "Cold? No. I had been warm for too long. I had given kindness where I should have given boundaries. And now, when I finally stood up for what was mine, they called it cold. But I didn't respond. Instead, I sat on the front porch that night, watching the stars come out over the land. The house was quiet, steady. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt clarity. Not peace, exactly, but direction. And then, as if on cue, I heard tires on gravel. I didn't move. A beat-up black sedan rolled to a stop at the edge of the drive. Lila stepped out, coat wrapped tight around her. I searching the dark until they landed on me. She didn't come any closer than the bottom step. "I know I can't win," she said. "They told me that." I said nothing. Let the silence answer her. "I know I hurt you," she continued. "But it wasn't all fake. We had something once, didn't we?" "Once," I said. She looked down at her hands. I was scared. "You were slipping away. The house, the land, your work, you always had somewhere else to be. Ray made me feel like I mattered. And so you sold my legacy," I replied, calm and sharp, "to feel significant." Tears welled in her eyes. "I made a mistake." "No," I said. "A mistake is spilling coffee. You made a choice. Over and over again." She took a deep breath. "I have nothing left. Ray's gone. My name is ruined. My friends don't return my calls. My mom's cut me off. I don't even have an apartment now. You had a home, I said. You burned it. She stood there a moment longer. Then, with trembling fingers, she reached into her coat and pulled out a crumpled envelope. What's that? My confession, she said. A statement, detailing everything. The transfers. The app scam. The forged signature. I wrote it for the trust board. For you. I stood slowly, walked down the steps, and took the envelope. I'll review it, I said. Will that help? It'll decide how you leave this behind, I said plainly. With a whisper or a lawsuit. She laughed bitterly, wiping at her face. Even now, you're still controlled. No, I said, turning away. I'm just no longer yours to manipulate. She got in her car and drove off without another word. Back inside, I opened the letter. It was sloppily written, but it was honest. She admitted to every transaction, every lie, every meeting with Ray. She even included dates, account names, and descriptions of when she started feeling like stealing felt safer than asking. I handed it to Miles the next morning. He read it silently. We'll keep this. Could save us weeks of litigation. Use it as leverage, I said. Not to punish her. Just to end this clean. He nodded. By Friday, the trust board sent their final notice. In exchange for the signed confession and permanent forfeiture of all estate claims, they would spare her from court. She would not face criminal prosecution, but she would be legally barred from any future claims, assets, or public statements about the trust, me, or the estate. It was done. The trap had been sprung, not with anger, not with shouting, but with truth. She fell in slowly, and now she couldn't climb back out. I spent that evening back on the land, watching the wind ripple across the wheat like the surface of a lake. I felt lighter. Not happy, but lighter. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, like soil settling after the rain. The farmhouse stood tall again. It had taken weeks of planning, hiring, lifting, and rebuilding, but the soul of the estate had started to breathe again. There was something sacred about restoring something that had been damaged, not just the land, but myself too. The truth is, when Lila betrayed me, she didn't just sell a property. She tried to erase years of devotion, decades of labor, generations of sacrifice. But the roots of this place ran deeper than her reach. The front porch had been sanded and stained anew. The paint peeled by the sun and years of storms was replaced with a clean coat of whitewash, just like my grandfather had done every spring. The weather vane creaked slightly in the breeze, its rust now scrubbed clean. Inside, I'd removed the last traces of her. Every framed photo that once held our smiles together had been boxed away. The kitchen no longer smelled like citrus cleaner and artificial candles. It smelled like cinnamon, sawdust, and fresh brewed coffee again. But the biggest restoration wasn't the structure. It was the silence. Good silence. The kind that didn't ache. The kind that let you hear your own thoughts without flinching. One by one, I'd called back the people who once made this land thrive. Raul, the groundskeeper, who had left when Lila restructured operations and replaced him with a landscaping app. MS. Delaney, the seasonal cook who used to prepare fresh pies for tour guests, let go with no warning. Even Carter, the farmhand who used to repair fences and run the harvest trucks, I found him 2 towns over, working at a car wash. When I asked him to return, he cried. We rebuilt, quietly. No press. No ribbon-cutting ceremony. Just people who cared about the land coming back to do what they did best. I doubled their pay, set up housing allowances, reopened the old guest barn and turned it into a community workspace. If Lila had tried to turn this estate into a cash grab, I would turn it into something better, stronger, not just on paper, but in purpose. The crops were next. Most of the fields had been left to rot. Irrigation lines clogged, fencing down, the soil compacted and tired. But we worked it back to life. We cleared the overgrowth, tested the nutrients, brought in livestock rotation to aerate the dirt. For weeks, I came home with sore legs, blisters, and dirt under my nails. And it felt good, because it was mine, earned, preserved. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hill and painted everything in gold, I stood at the edge of the northern field and watched the workers pack up. Raul gave me a thumbs up from the tractor. Carter shouted something about beer. I waved and promised I'd bring cold ones tomorrow. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not rushed. Careful. Hesitant. I turned. It was Sophia. Not a stranger. A neighbor. One of the few who had stayed silent during Lila's downfall, not out of spite, but caution. Sophia had always been kind to us, even when Lila barely acknowledged her. She had a quiet strength, ran a floral nursery just down the road, and once gave me homemade jam when I'd helped her fix her fence after a storm. She held a small basket in her hands, full of biscuits and herbs. "I heard the orchard's back up," she said. "Thought I'd come see for myself." I smiled. "It's breathing again." She looked past me to the trees in the distance. "It's good, seeing this place alive. Felt like a ghost town for a while." It was, I admitted. But ghosts don't get to keep the keys. She chuckled at that, then stepped closer and handed me the basket. "I don't want to intrude. I just wanted to say I'm glad you stayed." I nodded. "I almost didn't." "I know," she said, "but the land needs people who remember where it came from." I looked at her then, not just as a neighbor, but as someone who understood what legacy meant. And I realized how rare that was. "Thank you," I said, more sincerely than I'd said anything in a long while. She left not long after. But that moment stayed with me. Because rebuilding wasn't just about structures or soil. It was about people, community, trust, not just in others, but in yourself again. I spent that night in the old reading room, the fire crackling in the hearth. The house creaked in familiar places, not because it was falling apart, but because it was settling, like an old soul stretching its limbs after a long sleep. I pulled out the old ledger my grandfather had used to track crop cycles. Inside were notes from decades ago, pencil-scrawled margins about weather patterns, planting predictions, even reminders to talk to the chickens more. They seemed tense. One entry stood out. "If the land ever falls into the wrong hands, remember this. It doesn't die. It waits. For someone worthy. Someone patient. Someone who listens." I ran my fingers over the ink. It hadn't died. And I had waited. And now, I was listening. In the following weeks, the estate began to bloom. Not just the trees and crops, but the spirit of the place. People began showing up again. Old friends. Former business partners who had once written me off after Lila's betrayal. Some apologized. Most didn't. And that was fine. Because I wasn't bitter. I was better. Even Lila, for all the destruction she left behind, had given me something. Perspective. She taught me how blind trust can be a trap. How silence isn't always kindness. How love, when left untended, becomes entitlement. But more than anything, she taught me how to start again. By month's end, the estate had a new name. Not Tolliver Acres anymore. That name was gone with her. I renamed it Red Hill Farm, a nod to the clay-rich soil that stained your boots when the rain came heavy. Honest, strong, unmistakable. I had new signage carved from oak, installed at the front gate with care. Sophia was the first to see it. She smiled. "Looks good. It feels right," I said. And it did. Because I wasn't restoring what had been lost. I was building something new, with the bones of the past, yes, but for a future no one could steal again. 2 months had passed since I triggered the final clause. 2 months since the silence on my land had changed from suffocating to sacred. Each sunrise felt earned. Each small victory. A patch of revived soil, a restored barn beam, the return of a seasonal worker, was no longer a bandage over pain, but a brick laid into something permanent. But there was still one thread left untied. Not legal, not financial, personal. Lila's attorney reached out through official channels with a settlement proposal. I'd been expecting it. It was written in that half-apologetic, half-cautious tone that lawyers use when their clients have finally run out of cards to play. The letter admitted that Lila could not challenge the trust, not legally, not ethically. Her confession had made sure of that. She had no grounds left. No loophole. No defense. What she wanted now, apparently, was dignity. Her lawyer called it a graceful exit. The offer was simple. If I agreed to a formal settlement outside of court, she would sign over all remaining property and assets tied to the trust, issue a public statement acknowledging her misconduct, and never attempt to contact or interfere with the estate again. In return, I would cover her legal fees and not pursue public litigation. It was, objectively, a good deal. Clean. Efficient. Final. But I wasn't interested in final. I was interested in understanding. So I agreed to the terms, but added one condition of my own. She had to come in person and sign it. No digital signature. No courier. No evasions. Face to face. The meeting was set for a Thursday afternoon in Miles Granger's office. The same place where she'd once sat beside Ray, smiling, dismissive, confident in her plan. Now, she would return to that same table, alone. I arrived early. Miles poured coffee and said nothing, though the look in his eyes told me he knew this wasn't about closure on paper. 10 minutes past the hour, she arrived. Different. Not dramatically broken or suddenly humbled, but quieter. She wore a black sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back, no makeup, no jewelry. She looked smaller, not in stature, in presence, like someone who had been unraveling thread by thread and only just noticed how bare the spool had become. She nodded at Miles, then looked at me. Hi. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I just gestured for her to sit. She slid into the chair across from me and opened the folder on the table. Her hands were steady. She flipped through the pages like someone who already knew what she was giving up. I read every line, she said. Twice. You understand what it means? Miles asked. Yes, she said. It means I walk away with nothing. I looked at her. It means you walk away with your name. That's more than you gave me. She flinched. Just slightly. But enough. I deserve that, she admitted. No, I said. You deserve the consequences. This is just resolution. She nodded again, then reached for the pen. She paused just before signing. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I know I don't deserve that. I just wanted to say. I wasn't trying to ruin you. You just didn't care if you did, I said evenly. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I kept thinking I'd fix it later. That somehow, if Ray's business took off, I'd pay it all back, make it up to you. But it wasn't about money, I said. It was never about the dollars. It was about loyalty, integrity, and you sold those for a fantasy. She signed the papers. Miles gathered them, checking the signatures, then slid the final document into his folder. It's done, he said. But it wasn't. Not quite. She turned to me, voice soft. I see everything now. The real house. The real land. The real you. I didn't see any of it before. I just saw what I thought was holding me back. I didn't respond. Let her speak. I thought power meant control, she continued. But I see now that real power is restraint. You could have destroyed me. Publicly. Legally. But you didn't. No, I said. I let the truth do it. She stood slowly, gathering her coat. Thank you for not dragging my name through the mud. You did that yourself. I replied, not cruelly, just honestly. She lingered at the door for a moment. If you ever need help on the farm, volunteer work, I'd show up. Just to give something back. I shook my head. There's no debt left to pay here. But there's a life out there you still have to live. Go build something real this time. And with that, she left. The silence that followed her exit was different than the one before it. Not tense. Not bitter. Just complete. A chapter finally closed. That evening, I returned to the farmhouse. The porch lights were warm, the house buzzing with the quiet rhythm of a life no longer interrupted by betrayal. I poured a glass of bourbon, stepped outside, and sat in my grandfather's old rocking chair. For years, I'd thought justice was something loud. Courtrooms, accusations, revenge. But I was wrong. Justice, real justice, is quiet. It's choosing not to swing when you're holding the sword. It's letting someone destroy themselves by their own choices. It's knowing you could humiliate them and deciding not to. The next day, I received a delivery. A single envelope. Inside was a check, modest in amount, with a note, to cover my last month in the lake house. I know it doesn't matter, but I wanted to leave one door closed properly. Signed, Lila. I didn't cash it. I didn't even deposit it. I tucked it in the back of the ledger, behind the entries my grandfather once wrote, under the note about talking to the chickens. Because not every gesture needs a transaction. Some are just a period at the end of a long, broken sentence. The morning light spilled through the windows of the real farmhouse like honey, soft and golden, stretching across the wooden floors and warming the air with that familiar glow I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of light that made you stop mid-step just to breathe it in. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen with a cup of coffee in my hand, watching as the mist rolled off the fields. The land looked alive again, not just green and blooming, but proud, like it knew it had been defended. A year had passed since the call that shattered everything, and I was still here, still standing. But I wasn't the same man who had answered the phone that day at the airport terminal, briefcase in hand, passport tucked in my coat pocket, eyes fixed on a life built around certainty. That man was gone, and in his place stood someone quieter, stronger, and more deliberate. I had learned a lot since then. That love without respect is just dependency dressed up in vows. That silence is not always peace. It's sometimes a warning. And that sometimes, the only way to reclaim what's yours is not to fight louder, but to stand still and let the storm run out of breath. After signing the final documents and watching Lila walk away for the last time, the months that followed weren't about revenge or celebration. They were about building. Rebuilding the farm. Rebuilding the team. Rebuilding myself. I returned to the land like a soldier returns home after battle, changed, cautious, but determined. Each morning began with a walk along the east field. The path had become a ritual. I'd check the rows of young crops, feel the soil between my fingers, make notes in the old leather-bound notebook my grandfather had left me. The simple act of observing growth, patient, steady, quiet, taught me more about healing than any therapist could. The workers had settled into a rhythm again. Raul ran the greenhouse like a general. Carter took pride in the new irrigation lines. Ms. Delaney had returned to the kitchen and was once again feeding anyone who walked through her door, farmhands, visitors, even the occasional traveler who found our little slice of land by accident. And Sophia? Well, Sophia had become something steady too. It started with biscuits and conversation, then shared walks through the orchard. She never pressed, never asked questions about Lila or the past. She simply listened, laughed, and showed up. Sometimes that's all it takes. One afternoon, we sat beneath the willow tree by the creek, watching the water slip by like it didn't have a care in the world. You ever think, she said, that maybe the land kept you so rooted so you wouldn't blow away when the storm came? I looked at her and smiled. Every day. The truth was, legacy isn't just something we inherit. It's something we preserve through choices, through quiet decisions made when no one's watching, through the people we let into our lives and the ones we let go of. Lila was gone now. No calls. No emails. Just silence. The clean kind. Word around town was she'd moved 3 states away, started working at a small nonprofit, and hadn't tried to use the Tolliver name again. That name didn't mean anything anymore, not since I renamed the estate. Red Hill Farm had become more than a fresh start. It became a symbol of what survives, of what matters. Every Sunday morning, I'd sit on the porch and sip coffee as the sun came up. And every Sunday, without fail, Sophia would walk up the path from her nursery, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with nothing but a smile. We didn't need labels. Not yet. Maybe not ever. We were just 2 people who understood that healing didn't always need a destination. One particular morning, as the wind picked up and the wheat danced in the field like waves, I found myself reading the last letter my grandfather ever wrote me. I'd kept it tucked inside the back of the ledger, behind Lila's uncashed check and a sprig of lavender Sophia had once handed me without explanation. If the day ever comes when the world tries to take this from you, remember, you're not just defending land. You're defending history. The kind that can't be measured in acres or dollars. The kind that lives in your bones. He was right. This place was never about ownership. It was about stewardship. About keeping something alive that others would have let die. That night, I hosted a small gathering on the porch. Just the core crew. Raul, Ms. Delaney, Carter, and Sophia. No speeches. No toasts. Just laughter, warm food, and stories under the... She laughed. I see a man who let go of what broke him without breaking anyone else. That's rare. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just smiled and took another sip of bourbon. When the night ended and everyone went home, I stayed out on the porch a little longer. The air was cool and the stars were endless. And in that stillness, I let out a long, deep breath. Not out of relief, but because I finally could. Because the farmhouse she tried to sell was never really mine to lose. Because I had never been broken, just buried. And now, I was growing again, rooted in truth, watered by patience, and surrounded by people who saw the man beneath the wreckage. Not a victim, not a fool, but a keeper of something sacred, something that would never be sold again.